I'm going to call this meeting, well, we can turn down the volume. I'll call this meeting to order. Or I might just turn it off. That's right. Call this meeting to order. We have for February the 7th, 3:30 in the afternoon, the work session. Welcome to everybody who is here and everybody that is is watching at home. In regards to the meeting today, we have the agenda as it is. If we have a motion to approve the agenda, and I would ask part of that motion being moving the consent agenda that's under F over to our, do we have a motion to amend, to approve the agenda as it's presented? We have a motion. We have a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Now, the first order of business under the consent.
Question though, Mr. Chairman, right quick.
Yes.
I know we just voted on it, but number one on the APAC recommendations, is that, we're just going to put that on the consent agenda, is that pretty well, are we going to talk about it, or?
We can talk about that today if you'd like to, or I thought it was more of a point of reference in regards to our retreat. We're going to get the staff is going to get some information together about the process that how we're moving forward.
Okay. Well, I just didn't know whether that was together yet or not, so we're going to talk about it today, or?
We can talk about that today if you'd like to, or we can get an understanding from staff where they are as to the information that they're going to present to us.
Okay.
As it relates to the consent agenda, except for F1, F2 through F6, do we have a motion to place that under the consent agenda for February the 21st?
I think it's still on there, number 2. It's based on the agenda. It says that we're going to move that to.
We haven't discussed that. That was not part of what we had done. Let's just do this. Let's just go into new business, and we'll come back and talk to consent agenda.
That's why I'm just saying on that one, it says it's tabled till the March meeting. So when you look at the agenda itself, number 2 is tabled till March. Number 1 was tabled till March also, I believe.
Right, and the item you're mentioning was tabled because the board's desire was for a discussion to take place at the next chair-vice chair meeting, which hasn't happened, so that's.
I was just pointing out that based on the agenda that we have, the details of the agenda, both of those, even though they're on there now, both of those are already on there to be tabled, which I guess to the March meeting.
Okay. Let's do this under new business G1. Before we get into new business, I don't know if all the commissioners have had the opportunity to meet and speak to our new human resources officer or director, deputy manager, Mr. Day. If you'll introduce her and let her know what her responsibilities are for us.
Lundy Covington is our new HR director. Just
Lundy, if you'll come up.
Have a seat. And, she was most recently a vice president with Caroline's healthcare system in HR. But welcome here, and please say hello to everybody.
Happy to be here, learning a lot, and glad to be here observing the meeting this afternoon.
She started last Monday, and within 45 minutes was in a meeting that lasted a couple of hours, and
Right.
hasn't had a chance to slow down since. Good to see you. Thank you for coming. Under G1, the first business that we have today is page 46 of our agenda. It is North Carolina Department of Transportation presentation of the secondary road construction program. Yes, Mr. Morgan, I didn't know you were here.
Sorry.
You were sitting too quietly back there.
Just trying to stay low key. Thank you all for letting me come this afternoon. What you have before you is the proposed fiscal year 2010-2011 secondary construction program for Cabarrus County. We're a little late coming with it. Several reasons. It's been a very dynamic year funding-wise, like it has everywhere. I will say that DOT is happily to say we have a lot of cash on hand. Not necessarily budget money, but cash on hand. And the reason this has been real...
Don't tell the General Assembly that.
Well, that's the reason I'm here today, too, is to try to get it spent before the General Assembly gets it. But what we have proposed is actually the funding amount that we have that you see before you of $2.158 million is about 3 times what we normally do. or that we normally get funded here in Cabarrus County for secondary construction. We are trying to spend down some of our cash balances before June 30th, so we don't lose some of that money. And so what you see here, the first item you see on there, T. Lewis Road, is a secondary dirt road. That is our normal highway fund road that we are trying to do. We have 2 alternates on here, and the reason we're doing the alternates this year is depending on how much we get of the cash balances, we're going to try to do the alternates as well. So I can't, as the general statute reads for coming before the county commissioners, what you see is the program is definitely approved. The alternates come into play is if we do receive the additional funding that we have asked for, that we can go ahead and do those. As well as the last item you see there, the Bethlehem, Pine Bluff, and Lentz Harness Shop. The General Assembly combined the Highway Trust and the Highway Fund about 3 years ago. We have fully gone into where used to your Highway Trust was just for dirt roads. Highway Fund could be used for paved or dirt roads. It has now been combined together, and it's at the discretion of each division/district as to how we spend those monies. So we try to balance it out as far as doing dirt roads and now paved road improvements. Paved road improvements being basically taking a lot of our narrow roads, 16, 17, and 18 foot, trying to widen them out to a more manageable 20, 22, and 24 feet. Typically, we try to pick the roads that we're having maintenance issues on those, or you're very narrow and carry a lot of traffic. Bethlehem Church Road, as you can see, we're going from 16 foot. If you're familiar with Bethlehem Church Road up towards off of 49, Colt Brothers Construction is up off there. They continuously come in and out there with a lot of heavy equipment. The road, if you drive up there and take a look at it, you can see what it's doing. Pine Bluff, we're actually adding some additional funding to that, along with a proposed development that may be coming in at the corner of Pine Bluff in 2427, hopefully working to widen that out and strengthen it and pave it to the Stanley County line. And then Lentz Harness Shop, which is very aggressive, it's 5.5 miles. But what we're doing there is called a cement treated stabilization, where we will be basically taking the pavement that is there, widening the road out, bringing a milling machine in, milling up what is there, incorporating cement with it in order to increase the subgrade and pave it back, just like it is. And actually, over doing that, over putting plant mix asphalt, our estimate is we're saving about $600,000 by doing the cement. So hopefully we can take that $600,000 and apply it towards another road. So what I'm here today for is basically to let you see what is there, to ask for either a resolution or a concurrence that y'all agree, or would like us to move forward with this program, and to answer any questions that you may have about how we come up with this.
Are there any questions?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sort of know where this road is, but I'm not an expert on some of the roads in the county. But I did have a lady that contacted me about, she lives on Mountaineer Lane, which is off Zion Church Road, but I don't know which of the Zion Church roads it's off.
Yeah.
But anyway, Mountaineer Lane, she said that she has potholes in her road and wanted to know if anybody was looking at those.
I'd have to check. I don't have a list of all the roads that we maintain. I know a lot of what is off Zion Church Road is subdivision type roads. Mountaineer sounds like that. And it could be it's in the county. If it is in the county, then most likely we have it. I can contact my county maintenance engineer to look at that. If it's in the city of Concord, then it's the city's responsibility, but I'll pass that along to Joe Wilson on Mountaineer Lane.
Pretty certain that one's in the county. If you could check on that one and just
Yes,
let me
ma'am.
know. I mean, the county, the county do not maintain roads.
That's right.
And I just wanted you to say that was right, so it would be on TV. Even though they're county roads, and we, the county, do not maintain roads, it's the Department of Transportation that does. But anyway, I had a question from her. She was wondering about, back when the snow was here, when her road was going to get cleared, and by the county, she presumed, and also about some potholes. So I wanted to pass that along since you were here today.
I will let my county maintenance engineer know that, and we'll take care of that, or take a look at it.
Thank
Let
you.
you know. Thank you.
Also, I've got a question for anyone for my knowledge and for anyone who's watching. If you've got issues with potholes, road maintenance, they should contact the NCDOT in Mount Pleasant. Is that correct?
That is, if it is a DOT main
Right.
road,
If
that
it's
is
county.
correct.
Correct.
I can give the number. You can speak with Janice Hampton. She is the county maintenance engineer. Her number is 704-436-9316. And they'll be glad to take a look at everything.
Great.
Unfortunately, with the snow and ice and the salt and everything else, it is a growing problem like it is every year.
Mr. Morgan, when you're talking about cement stabilization, is that going to be for the 3 roads that y'all are going to?
The Bethlehem Church Road and Lentz Harness Shop Road are cement-treated stabilization roads. Pine Bluff right now is not cement-treated stabilization. We're waiting to see how the proposed development, there's a mixed-use development on about 65 acres that's being proposed on the corner. The developer naturally will be responsible for some of the roadway improvements out there, and depending on how, to the extent of what is done through the development, and depending on our funding, we might add cement-treated stabilization to that as a cost savings. The problem with Pine Bluff doing full cement-treated, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but we have a lot of pipes, larger drainage pipes on the road that have very minimal cover on the road. To do cement treated, you've got to have at least 12 inches. We do 12 inches of milling and rejuvenation with the cement. We've got some pipes that have cover on the magnitude of about 6 inches. So in order to be able to do the cement treated, we've got to come in and build the low area up. So we have a minimum to that. Taking in that into consideration, it's probably just as cheap to do the standard widen, resurface, and strengthen it through stone and asphalt by doing that. So we'll weigh those options once we get out to Pine Bluff, seeing how much money we have left over, and take that into consideration.
How long does the road last when it's have the cement treated stabilization?
The one that we're presently in the process of doing in Stanley County right now is our first one that we've done in this district. It's a very rural road, but we picked it because it backs into our cotton gin that we have in Stanley County. So if you've seen the cotton trucks that are on the road, they are quite heavy when they're hauling cotton. And so it's a cut-through road for them. We added it because of the increased traffic. What we're hearing from the contractor that we use in Approach Construction here from Cabarrus County is doing the work, is that densities with stone, we typically get on a good day 96 to 98% density when we're setting it up to pave. With the cement treated stabilization, we're guaranteed at least 99%, in most cases 100%. We will still have stress cracks come back into it because it is, when cement hardens, it's not very flexible and everything. So, but it does do away with the rutting and the base failures that are in there. So we're looking at putting a triple seal surface coating, tar and gravel, the old term surface coat, back over it once we're done. But we're being told where our normal process gets us 10 to 12 years, we're looking at 18 to 20 years out of this, other than the cracks. Now, once cracks come back into it, we have procedures in which we can crack seal or just put a thin coat back over the top to seal the cracks up to keep the water out. But we should not have any base failures for hopefully 18 to 20 years.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Morgan?
I've got one more question.
Yes,
sir.
When will you know the allocations for next year?
They typically, after the budget's approved, we typically go on what we have estimated historically through the years. We usually do that around the middle of May to the end of May. My best guess is I'm hoping to be back here in June to do the 2011-2012 program that we have left for secondary construction. This $2.1 million that we're proposing is actually between now and June 30th, we're going to try to put this on the ground. So it's very aggressive. We'll be doing it both through our forces as well as contract in order to be able to put this on the ground. So
Thank you.
hopefully. Yes, sir.
And within those contracts, there's always a time frame. They're 90 days, 120 days, 180, whatever the
depending on
days.
the magnitude of the project itself, we won't, when we say June 30th, in order to spend our cash balances down, that is checks cut, mailed to the contractor by June 30th. So we're probably looking at completion date somewhere between the middle of May to the end of May, 1st of June, so that if there's any punch list items that need to be done to final these projects out, we can get that done prior to June 30th.
Okay. Any other questions? We have a motion to place this under consent agenda. We have a second. We have a motion, we have a second to place this under consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your
Mr.
time.
Morgan. Next is G2, which is the Economic Development Grant request for SP Richards Company and request for public hearing. I'll call on Mr. McDaniels and bring up anybody you need to.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm here to give an overview of the project before you. SP Richards is considering a distribution center in Kannapolis, actually in the Afton Ridge subdivision. It's more familiarly known in the county as the Super Target Shopping Center, but it would actually be the industrial or commercial side of not the retail side. So it would be a separation between those two uses. But SP Richards is considering a $11.8 million facility, roughly 200,000 square foot. This would be a facility for their office distribution products. They distribute office furniture, office supplies, things of that nature. The good news for us, and one of the reasons we're excited about the project, is it would create 66 new jobs for the community. You can see a very nice average wage of $18.75 an hour for the clerical, warehouse, and drivers. Excuse me, and that does exceed our current average wage for the logistics and distribution careers. I did break down a grant projection for SP Richards. In the first 3 years, in the real property, the company would pay roughly $63,000 in taxes and receive a grant of $53,000. The county would still net $9,000 for the first 3 years on the real estate, which is more or less the building. There is a personal property parameter to this project as well. That's $1.8 million. So we do depreciate that. So you see that reflected in the grant analysis. Once again, with the 85% grant, the county would still receive a net in the first 3 years. In year 4, the grants go away, and the company would continue to pay their taxes as they would have in years 1 through 3, but simply the grant would go away and the county would benefit fully. Be glad to answer any questions that you may have about the project, and hopefully the commission will see fit to call for a public hearing on the 21st.
Any questions for Mr. McDaniels? This would be 66 new jobs
Yes, sir.
for Cabarrus County.
We anticipate there may be some carryover of some of the managers. The company itself doesn't know. They do have a facility in Charlotte as well, so we don't know if some of the managers will transition to a Kannapolis facility.
And the real estate, that would be the purchase of the property as well as the development of the building.
That's actually the building
Oh, that's the
cost.
building.
Yeah, we've pulled out the acquisition cost
Okay.
of the property.
And right now, the land that they're looking at is vacant land.
It's vacant, that's correct.
Okay. Any other questions?
I've got a question. If, if this is going to create, 66 jobs, perhaps some carryover, so it may not be 66, what is the follow-up process that we know or we're guaranteed that there's 66 jobs?
Well, actually, with the current method, we have an existing industry program, so we'll go out and call on the company, and hopefully, obviously, they grow to 100 or 80. So we do keep a tally on that job figure. The way the grant programs work with the investment, that's really the trigger for the grant. So once the company comes in and exceeds that 1.5 million threshold, then they qualify for a grant.
Okay. Any other questions?
Are they relocating from Charlotte to Concord, or are they just starting a new business in Concord?
They're actually, this could be a consolidation of two facilities. There's a facility in the Triad area as well as Charlotte. So this location is optimal for them to serve those two markets.
How many people do they have working in those locations now?
I do not know. I can get that before the public hearing, though.
So it is a relocation of those two facilities?
That's correct.
Any other questions? We have a motion to place this under new business and call for a public hearing.
So moved.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have is G3, is Cabarrus County Schools' request for escrow funds for easements on Weddington Road for road improvements at H.E. Winkler Middle School. I'll call on Mr. Whitkey, Len Whitkey with the schools, and anybody else you'd like to call up.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm not sure all the information that you might have before you, but we did submit the appraisal that we had done on the property. And just to kind of give you a recap, this is it's on the outward bound, if you will, side of the school's drive. So in other words, it's in between, I guess is best described. It's between both of our drives, the inlet drive and the exit drive. And as we were designing this project, we knew we had to do road work. As it turned out, the DOT felt we needed to do more than originally anticipated. So we have some minor expansion of the road pavement area as sort of part of an acceleration lane, and then also a widening, or deepening rather, slightly widening of the drainage ditch along the frontage of Weddington Road, both on the Cabarrus County portion of land as well as our neighbor, who are the Mr. and Mrs. Christopher Newsom. We had an appraisal done of the Newsom's property so that we could fairly compensate them for their property and the use of their land. And originally, it was done on a smaller easement assessment. As it turned out, following review by DOT, we had to slightly increase the size of the easement areas. And instead of, the original was .318 acres of land to be used on a permanent basis, and .136 acres of land to be used as temporary construction easement. Those numbers increased to 3.65 acres of land on a permanent basis and .091 acres on temporary construction easement. So the original, per the appraisal's value, the original lands and valuation was for approximately $18,831. I did some revision based on the slightly larger areas that we were going to need for the easements, and those numbers came out roughly to $20,805. Excuse me, total of $21,324. When I went to talk with the Newsoms, and we had had several conversations about this, the proposal that I initially went to the Newsoms with was $25,000. They thought that over and did not want to accept that amount. Our board then authorized me to offer $30,000, which is, again, I'll just remind you that based on calculations, that's roughly $9,000 over valuation. And that was also refused by the Newsoms. They came back with a request for, I think the original request was for $48,000. Our board discussed this and felt that, you know, we were in excess of the valuation with a $25,000 offer, let alone a $30,000 offer. So we then, the board decided to condemn the property based on that information, and we're requesting your support of that position.
Are there any questions for Mr. Whitkey?
And these are funds that you currently have
Yes, ma'am.
for the project, so it's just a matter of allocating funds that you're not asking for additional dollars from the county.
No.
You're just asking for us to agree to escrow those funds once, for you to go through the condemnation process and to use the funds that you currently have.
That's correct.
Was this contemplated prior to the construction?
I'd have to say no, Mr. Chairman. As far as, you mean the condemnation process? Or
Yeah, what I'm saying is if you have the monies, where's the monies coming from in regards to the project?
There's a land fund or a land line item in the project. So in addition to the purchase of the original lands, we realize that there may be easements on pretty much any of our projects that we have to acquire, whether on a temporary or permanent basis. So there are funds available.
And I'm trying to look, what I've got, what's up here on the screen is looks like where the easement's going, right up here,
Yes, actually, if you look to the right, it says Christopher Lynn Newsom.
right here.
Yes, it's that portion of land, and further north, I believe, further east, that the Newsom's property.
So this over here is Sheffield Manor?
Yes, sir.
Because I thought that the school drive was right here.
You are correct, yes. One of them, the entrance drive is there.
The entrance drive is here.
Yes, sir.
I'm just trying to figure out how it gets onto his property. If it stops right here, where there's definitely a line demarcation, and there's no easement on to the right of it or to the east of that line or demarcation.
Yeah, I do have a drawing, which I thought I forwarded this to staff, but,
Next page.
oh, okay,
Next
there you go.
page.
Thank you. That's the Newsom easements, based on the DOT requirements for improvements.
Okay, if this is Weddington Road,
Yes, sir. To your left would be our property and that entrance drive.
right, correct.
And what the,
Their DOT is asking you for an additional amount of road frontage or expanding the road here?
it's widening of the road, yes, sir.
Okay. I mean, I drive that road every day. That's how I come into work and go home every night. And I'm trying to figure out how the road's going to be straightened. Are they going to make it doesn't seem like it makes any sense that DOT is requesting this.
Well, I think it has to
Can
do
you
with.
make any heads or tails about how this is going to be?
What isn't shown on any of these drawings, of course, is there's an improvement which involves a deceleration lane on the county's property going
Correct.
into the entrance. And what the DOT wanted was a wider pavement so that as buses coming from the eastern direction, going west, would be able to do is they could, if there was traffic oncoming, they could in effect be partially queued there and allow for wider pavement so cars could get around them, I believe is the thought. And it's not a significant widening, it's only a few feet, actually, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just, anyway, it's a hard time trying to conceptualize, especially when you're stopping at, not you, but DOT is requesting you to stop at Ruth Miller's. It seems like it would run all the way through to Weddington Hills exit or
Right.
egress.
No, that's not the case.
Okay. Maybe that's the reason why they have extra money left over. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Whitkey? We have a motion to place this under consent agenda? We have a second? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next matter we have is G4, which is the home program public hearing. Mrs. Sifford.
Thank you. Each year, we're required to hold a public hearing to participate in the home program. The home program is a housing rehab program for elderly, disabled, and other low-income individuals and families. We are required a 25% match for those activities. We do that as part of the budget process. At this point, we hold the hearings in order to participate, make application to the city, and then we are not contractually bound until the funds are available and a contract would be signed, and that's usually July, August, September range. Are there questions?
Any questions for Mrs. Sifford?
Is this about the same amount each year?
Yes, I actually got a projection just a day or two ago that brought it down a little bit, and I may adjust down to 2 units. It's kind of hard to project, but I think we're going to get around 106,000 for activities and about 113 or so total for admin and the activities.
And there's, to address Ms. Dubois or Mr. Day, there's no problem with this match being in the budget for next year.
Can you,
I mean, I think it's a good program, so.
can you talk about the program a little bit about
Sure.
who would benefit from this program? How do they get these, the use of this program, and sort of what our role is?
We get a lot of our applicants from DSS, aging, various departments, and other, like the City of Concord gives us referrals. The program qualifications are quite extensive now. Outside of income, we do title searches on the property, ensure that it would be something that you could put a deed of trust on. Each property that we work on, we put a deed of trust for the full amount of the construction on it. It is a prorated one, a deferred one. If they live there the time out, they don't have to pay any of it back. If for
What's a timeout?
for the duration of the agreement. If they live there for the duration of the agreement, nothing changes. Most of them now are running 15 years because of the amount of the loans that we're having to provide. Because under these programs, once you touch the home, you have to bring it to code. So every item in that home that is a code issue has to be resolved. And so most of these homes, when you get there, have not had much in the way of maintenance for many years. So we're usually doing roofs, electrical, plumbing, a lot of handicap accessibility items, heating and air items, those kind of things.
So the homeowner is paying back monies?
The homeowner typically is not paying it back unless they have to sell the home or transfer it for some reason, at which time a prorated portion of it comes back to the county. Most of these clients would not be in a position to make any payments back to us just based on income alone.
Okay.
So if they pass and the property goes to someone else, they sell it, whatever, however it would transfer to somebody else, they're required to pay back that prorated portion, which we put back into the program when we receive it.
Okay.
And that's required by the grant to put it back into the program.
Who's required to pay back that portion? The individual home, the person who purchased the home?
Typically what happens is when it's transferred, the attorneys will have that worked out. Most of the time it ends up being sold. There is, in some cases, a clause where if a family member who would be qualified for the grant is the one that inherits the property, that they could make application and we could redo the loan in their name and they could just kind of take it over. It doesn't often happen. Most of the time it's sold to another individual and it's just paid off just like a mortgage would be.
So where does the original funding for this program?
It comes from HUD through the City of Concord. We're in a home consortium with them, and we've been in that for close to 20 years now. Each year, it's an annual agreement. Well, we have to do I think, a 3-year agreement to participate, and then each year annually, we decide whether we're going to participate. There are different organizations in it that don't participate. They come in name only to allow the rest of us to participate.
What was the county's match last year?
$40,000. And I have dropped it this year already to match the reduced amount.
Is this a program where, obviously, a lot of the work has to be done, especially electrical and plumbing, by a licensed contractor?
Mm-hmm.
But some of the work, is it work that can be done by service organizations or church groups or scouting groups that way it lowers actually the cost of the rehabilitation? Or is it certain requirements that the program has?
Honestly, with liability issues lately,
Uh-huh.
It has gotten very complicated to do anything like that. What we have done traditionally is bid this out to general contractors.
Mhm.
That way we have one person and one license and
Got it.
one
Got it.
insurance to deal
Okay.
with if something were to go wrong.
Okay.
Just from a liability standpoint, it's been better. Now, we have, on some occasions, in the other programs, the smaller ones where we're just building ramps and things
Mhm.
like that. In fact, we have just, we're working in process now, partnering with an agency that's willing to build ramps, and since we have such a backlog right now, we're providing some of those clients to them to do that. Things that don't fit into our grants, painting, things like that, we work with some of these agencies to do that kind of thing. Churches that primarily are doing days of service, and we're working with them where we have the opportunity.
Okay, great.
Commissioner Burge?
How many houses a year do y'all usually do under this program?
It varies, and it really depends on the severity of the houses, because, one house may cost $40,000, another one may cost $20,000, but I think 3 is probably a reasonable amount between the match and the money that we would receive for this.
And you said if they stay there 15 years, they don't have to pay anything back.
That's correct.
Now, what if they stay there 12 years and sell the house? Is it prorated to the person buying the house?
What happens is, when the estate's closed, just like if you own 3 years' worth of your mortgage, that 3 years' amount would be paid back to us. So basically, the family or whomever is cut a check, and we're cut a check for our portion, and anybody else whom they might owe money on that property for any reason is cut a check out of it. So we actually did get, under another program, a payoff recently, and we rolled that back into the program. But it is fairly rare, but I think it's probably something we're going to see a little more of in the next few years.
Any other questions? We have a motion to move this to the new business to hold a public hearing. We have a second? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. G5 is emergency management adoption of the ordinance amending Chapter 34. I would call on Fire Marshal Steve Langer.
Good evening. We're here before you this afternoon to ask the board to hold a public hearing at this month's regular meeting on the proposed changes for the fire prevention ordinance. An update was needed to get the ordinance consistent with county policies and procedures. There should be a summary of changes within your packet that outlines these changes. And just ask if you have any questions.
Does this in any way affect the fire tax in each one of the districts?
No, the departments will still have to make that request yearly and would come before this board.
Okay. What is the significance of the changes? Why the changes now instead of a year ago or what have you?
Well, going back and looking at the ordinance, we had areas in the ordinance where it listed fees, amounts, fines, and with the current process of budget, with the fees and fine schedule being submitted during the budget time, that could change yearly. So we wanted to take those fee amounts out of the ordinance so that that didn't confuse the public and was consistent with whatever was adopted by the board. And then we made some changes to the date submitted for the audits for the departments. That way our staff can have the time that's necessary during the budget process for the county to review the fire department's budgets, their audits, and provide any recommendations to county management and to this board on tax increases for the departments.
Now, last year, I thought somebody brought to us concerning the fireworks and ceding our responsibility to issuing permits to the cities.
That is in here as well. We went ahead and added the fireworks section to the ordinance to address actions already taken by the board so that that information is out there for the public and for these companies as well. It gives them somewhere to go and look to see where they need to pull their permits. Often we'll get calls asking whether or not they need to pull their permit with us or with the cities. So that's listed in the ordinance. That way they have it there and they can see it.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Langer? We have a motion to place this under new business to hold a public hearing.
So moved.
We have a motion, we have a second. Second. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next matter we have is G6 is the presentation of 5 additional 5-year plans. We would call on Mrs. Dubois. Are you going to be handling this, or?
Probably a joint effort by the time it's through. Presented to you are 4 more additional 5-year plans from the retreat that you had discussed, freezing the spending levels at 2011 for 2 of the plans with quarter-cent sales tax. With 1 plan with quarter-cent sales tax, 1 without, and then freezing expenditures at the 2012 level, one with quarter-cent sales tax and one without. Those plans are before you. 1 and 2 have the quarter-cent sales tax. 1 freezes at 2011, 2 freezes at 2012. 3 does not have the quarter-cent sales tax and freezes at 2011 level, and 4 freezes at a 2012 level. You also have a Plan 5 that actually balances itself out with no quarter-cent sales tax. It's the original Plan 3, freezing expenses at 2011 level and bringing revenue neutrality of 5.3 cents into play in 2013. So those were the options that you had requested from the retreat to be presented to you, and all 5 plans have a funding of a one-time revenue in fiscal year 2012 of $5.7 million to close out 2 capital project funds. So I just wanted to point that out, that there is that one revenue that's in all 5 plans. So that's the information that was requested. If any specific questions about any of the plans, I'd be more than happy to answer any of them.
Is there any questions from the board to Mrs. Dubois? Well, I certainly appreciate all the effort that you and staff have put into this, trying to get the information to us. I think that questions will abound once we've had a chance to digest it. What I'd ask is that maybe if we have any questions between now and the 17th, we can certainly put this on the agenda to talk about on the 17th, but we do need to start giving staff more of a direction as to how we want to proceed as we move forward. As I stated in the retreat, as far as I'm concerned, is that I think that 2011 needs to remain, or FY 2012 needs to remain with the funding that we had put in there or thought about from last year as a template. I don't think we freeze at the 2011 levels, is my opinion. But that's something that the remaining portion of the board needs to make a decision about what you're comfortable with doing and what you think what guidance we need to give to staff. So, because we are quickly getting down the road, and I know that Mrs. Kennedy and everyone that she's working with would like to get that information so that they can start at least having a template to work within.
I do, for a point of clarification, towards the bottom of each of the pages, you have the estimated unreserved fund balance.
Yes.
And you have that percentage. Is that the 15% that board policy says that we must maintain?
Correct.
Okay, so anytime that drops below 15% based on current board policy, that would be a problem.
Correct.
Because that happens a number of times. That's why I was pointing that one out.
Yes.
I believe on all the plans it hits. So just to point that out for all the commissioners to look at that line, which is the line just above what's highlighted for the property tax rate, that according to board policy, that number cannot fall below 15%. And I believe you also stated that, I don't remember what it was, 20% or what the number was, is now the recommended amount, but that we're okay, the LGC is okay with us being at 15%.
The recommendation from the Local Government Commission for a county our size is 20%, but as far as our cash flow is concerned, the 15% is still working for the county. And in comment to Mr. White, wanting to look at the 2012 level of freezing expenditures, that will require more than revenue neutrality in 2013. I did try, and it didn't work without it. So I did want to point that out.
In regards to revenue neutral, is that for each individual taxpayer, it may be different, but as a whole, taxpayers will not be paying any greater taxes than what they did the year before if you do a revenue neutral rate.
That is correct.
Okay. And even though the rate may go up, like in our instance, the rate would go up, if it's revenue neutral, to 68 cents. That doesn't mean on par or on average, everybody's rate is going up because they're going to pay the same.
Depending on how their valuation comes out, if their valuation is decreased, they would pay less. If it was increased, they would pay more.
Right.
But like you said, as a county as a whole, it would not generate any more additional revenue than it did the previous year.
And that is a projection, it's not a reality at this point.
That is very correct. That is a projection.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments to Mrs. Dubois, Commissioner Meismer?
Under expenditures, the new debt service for 2012, 2013, under housing unit for detention center, why is there a decrease for 12, 13, 14?
As you start paying your principal off, your interest declines.
Okay.
So there's interest savings on there. Another part of this agenda item too was the discussion of the quarter-cent sales tax,
Yes.
and whether y'all are interested in placing that on the February 21st meeting. Yes, February 21st, still the right month.
For approval.
For approval.
Or denial, either way.
Either way, yes.
Okay. Does anybody have any more questions in regards to the financial plans that Mrs. Dubois has provided to us?
I've got well, kind of goes hand in hand with the
Okay.
referendum. Why is the referendum not a separate agenda item why would that not be discussed separately from the 5-year plans?
Well, we can. I mean,
Okay.
it's just part and parcel, because when you're talking about the 5-year plan, one of the scenarios is that there is a quarter-cent sales tax in there.
Right.
So that, it's not that we won't discuss it separately, it's just that it is part of the plan, so then it would be in conjunction with that discussion. So I want to just clear up, is there any questions in regards to the 5-year plans as they are presented? Okay, now let's move on to the quarter-cent sales tax. And in regards to the quarter-cent sales tax, that is about a third of the way down under the general, actually 3/4 of the way under the general fund, the addition of the quarter-cent sales tax. You projected the sales tax to be 3.036 million, 1.5 additional, then 46,000 additional each year. Is that correct, Mrs. Dubois?
Yes, that's a total of $4.6 million to generate if you did it on an annualized basis. And I used the formula that was provided by the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners to project that, and then had a modest increase
Right.
each year thereafter.
And in regards to each one of the financial plans, if the quarter-cent sales tax is not implemented, then what does that mean as a property tax rate to keep the same revenues as we are projecting the revenues to be?
That's why the illustration of number 5 plan is in there without the quarter-cent sales tax, showing you if you froze the expenditures at the 2011 level, it would work at that revenue neutrality level. If you wanted to freeze them at 2012, some other accommodations would have to be made if the scenario is what happened. You know, revenues could change, sales tax projections could change. We're hearing information that we could be increasing sales tax 4 to 5% next year. I'm not very comfortable with that at this point in time. Waiting to see how
Explain what
this-
you just said.
The North Carolina Association of County Commissioners are projecting, especially from within this region, a 4 to 5% increase in sales tax revenue.
Okay.
We're not seeing it right now, so we're holding off as far as that projection is concerned. We're trying to get some more information as to where that projection is coming from. This particular fiscal year we're in right now, they recommended, I believe it was a 2% increase, and we stayed flat.
Okay.
So I'd like to see more how this year turns out in comparison to what we did versus what they projected, compared to what they're projecting for next year.
Commissioner Meismer?
That projection is per county request, not state overall sales tax. Is that correct? Of the 4%?
I think it was specific to which region you were in.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an average of 4% for the entire state.
Average.
Some of the larger metropolitan areas, they said may be a little higher, just because of the population in them.
But in regards to our sales tax projections, we have always been more conservative than what the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners has recommended or their project. We've always been more conservative than what they have said we can be or we should be.
Correct.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify that so people watching don't think that their sales tax can go up 4%. Yeah.
Right, they're just saying that we'll receive revenues an additional 4% in revenue somewhere, somehow.
They're expecting more people to be shopping, I guess.
Right.
The projections did not come from the association, they came from a speaker at the association conference.
Okay.
It was actually one of the economists or professors from the School of Government,
Okay,
just to qualify that.
okay. Any other questions for Mrs. Dubois? Any discussions amongst the board members concerning the quarter-cent sales tax referendum, if we should move to place that on the agenda or not?
In regards to the referendum, if that was a decision by the board to put that on the May referendum, how would that involve schools, being that it's voting precincts?
Schools
You-
currently have a date in their calendar. I would have to look and see if there's one in May, this May, because the calendar's changed so much. But schools are public buildings, and a referendum can be held whether schools are in session or not. I believe Kannapolis City Schools doesn't typically put the May date in their calendar as a date that students are not on campus. And without going on their website, I would say the majority of school systems have school in session, and they still have voting going on. Cabarrus County has tried not to do that, but the May date is one that's kind of in flux sometimes based on the weather and things that happen like that. So I don't know that one offhand, but.
I would think that they wouldn't have a date in their calendar, seeing that it's municipal elections and there's no primaries.
But a lot of times they build that one in each year just to make sure they have it. But frankly, according to the Board of Elections, that is not, I don't want to say this in a negative way, so excuse me if it comes across that way, but these are public buildings, and public buildings can be used by the Board of Elections for elections as called. So therefore, if a school site is a voting site, is a precinct, then the schools will make accommodations to handle the traffic that you get from elections, whether students are on campus or whether it's a staff work day and just the staff is there. So, I mean, they're public buildings and they're used for public purposes.
I've got a follow-up question. Pam, you and I had spoke once about if we were to hold the referendum to November, the cost in May would be $100,000 for the county to hold the referendum. If we were to push that referendum to November, seeing that there's municipal elections, what was the cost just to open precincts in the unincorporated?
I had a conversation with Ms. Grist, and because the county would officially call for a referendum to be placed on the ballot, that we would take the burden of that cost away from the cities, because we would be requiring those precincts to be open.
I see.
$100,000, right?
Yeah, there'd be a small savings. Part of that what the cities would have to pay, because there's certain things that would be required for their elections, but actually opening the precincts would be the burden of the county.
So we'd still have to pay $100,000 regardless? Okay.
Estimated at that cost. This would be, when it's combined with the city, it would be a different type of an election, and there would be more types of officials that would have to be there because of their election process. So I can't say that it would only cost $100,000.
I think that, didn't the election supervisor suggest it'd be $15,000 to $20,000 savings to the
Yes,
county?
that would be the portion that the cities would pick up for the specific needs that they would have, because of the types of judges that may be required for their election that would not have been required for the call election that we would do.
Or maybe I should rephrase that. Any additional cost over and above what it would cost to hold the election for the county question would be borne by the city. So there are extra precinct officials or judges that have to be paid for a municipal election, and the cities would bear that cost. So I guess actually the county costs would remain about the same, and the cities would be the big winners.
Mm-hmm.
If it passed, how soon will it go in effect?
If it passed in May, 90 days, October 1st. Have to give 90 days and start the first day of the next quarter.
Would we have any savings to put it off till November? Then if it passed then?
I would think that the savings potentially would be $15,000.
Right.
But there would be additional cost because of any debt that the whole purpose of the $0.25 is to pay for the construction debt for the schools. So that you would actually, if it passed in November, you would lose the interest that you would be paying from from July until the first payment can be made from the sales tax if it's implemented in November, which wouldn't take an effect until
So
February.
you'll actually lose 6 months of tax, basically,
Yes, sir. You'll lose 6 months of tax.
which is, what, $1.5 million, something like that?
Yes, sir.
It'll be a difference between October 1st versus April 1st. Because it's 90 days plus starting at the first day of the next quarter.
Okay. Is there any other questions? We have a motion to place this on new business discussing on on February the 17th, or February the 21st, I should say.
So moved.
I'll second the motion to put it on the agenda for discussion.
Okay. We have a motion and we have a second to place this under new business. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next we have is G7, is approval of grant of permanent greenway and sanitary sewer easement. I call on Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back in 2007, the Board of Commissioners approved the transfer of some real property, unimproved real property, that is bounded roughly by Cabarrus Avenue West, White Street, Brown Street, and Warren C. Coleman Boulevard. It took some time for Habitat for Humanity to get the way they want to develop that project underway. And it wasn't actually until last year that property was conveyed, actually transferred by deed to Habitat for Humanity as originally required. That deed had some deed restrictions in it that controlled how the property could be developed in order to make sure that it was going to be developed for habitat-style housing. Those restrictions in the deed allow the county to maintain some control over the use. And the development is now underway, and they needed a sewer line across part of the property, and they want to put a greenway in along that sewer line as well. So there was a request to the county to permit from the City of Concord and from Habitat to agree that sewer line and a greenway can go in. And you'll see the easement document is attached to the agenda item. And so the city and Habitat are seeking the board's approval for that purpose.
Any questions for Mr. Cook? Since the city is requesting this, I would assume that the line is not going to involve Wasack at all. And Wasack's not going to be involved at all. We don't have to get any approval. We don't have to.
No.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Cook?
Make a motion to put it under consent.
We have a motion to place this under consent agenda. Do we have a second? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. G8 is on page 117, and this is the development of 2011 legislative goals. Mr. Day.
There were a few items that came up at the board's retreat, but as you all know, we ran out of time before we got to have any discussion. And there was also an item that had been proposed earlier, suggested by the Mount Pleasant Town Administrator, which has to do with changing the North Carolina Rural Center's criteria to match that of USDA rural development, which you're eligible for USDA rural development if you're in a town of 5,000 or less or in an unincorporated area, basically. The other items that came up at the agenda were the issue of unsolicited telephone books came up, and I spoke with the county attorney, who has some additional information on that if you'd like to discuss it. Commissioner Poole had suggested reinstating the sales tax exemption, or reinstating the sales tax exemption for public schools. The Chairman White brought up the payment in lieu of taxes issue, and also unfunded mandates issue. And then there was, I don't know if anyone heard it or not, but there was some discussion about ending local government incentives, and there is some talk around Raleigh about a bill that would do that and limit incentives to be paid by the state government. And then there's also a long list of things from the County Commissioners Association, and Commissioner Meismer was your representative there, and I'm sure would be happy to talk about those items.
Okay. Mr. Cook, if you could address the regulation of delivery of unsolicited telephone books, please.
Chairman, I'll be happy to. The statute that actually would presumably govern this is 14-399.1, which is the anti-litter state statute. And it really comes down to the definition of litter and the exceptions to that definition, and specifically to get to the exception, there seems to be an exception from the definition of the word litter for the following items: political pamphlets, handbills, religious tracts, newspapers, and other similar printed materials, the unsolicited distribution of which is protected by the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of the State of North Carolina. So the issue comes down to whether these unsolicited phone books would fit within any of those categories or be close enough in kind to any of those categories that it would be accepted from the definition of litter, which is otherwise prohibited under that statute. And it would seem to me that given the nature of it, the way in which it's distributed, the kind of material that a phone book contains, or the kind of information a phone book contains, it arguably would be within that exception, and I think it would take some sort of action by the state legislature in order to clarify that as it relates to phone books.
What's the thought of the board? I know that I've had a lot of people contacting me about the phone books being dropped off out in the country. They left out there for all the weather to take away or throw into a ditch, and then we got to deal with it on another way. And another way that is affecting the telephone books is the number that gets thrown into the landfill because people take them up, they don't want them, and they throw them in the trash can, or they just throw them in the trash can, and then we got to deal with them in the landfill. I believe that when we were at our retreat, that it was brought up that a tremendous amount of space is consumed at various landfills just based on telephone books that are unwarranted. I think that it's something that it can be unsightly when they're just flapping in the wind out there. Is that something anybody else is concerned about? Commissioner Meismer?
I agree with you.
Okay.
I do know they make, you throw one in a rabbit hutch, they make the rabbit will shred them up. So it's basically great, keeps them occupied for hours, not days. With 3 phone numbers at my house, then we get a few phone books. Or you can also put some wire around them and use them for fire logs.
That's another way.
Okay. Anyway, just thought.
Okay.
Little theme of sustainability there.
How about the reinstatement of the sales tax exemption for public schools? that certainly would save the schools a tremendous amount.
Well, right now, the things that we can partner with them on, they can save, but there are a majority of things that they purchase, they used to have it. To me, it's completely illogical that NASCAR has it and public schools doesn't have it. And there are others besides just NASCAR that has sales tax exemption, but I think that's an oversight of the legislature, and I would recommend that we have that as one of our legislative goals. I mean, anything that any way the schools can save benefits us, and it would seem to me would benefit the state. So I just think it's illogical that they haven't put that back in, so.
Well, seeing as how the schools have been, with the growth in North Carolina and the need for additional schools, that if they are not careful, they're paying a lot of taxes back to the state of North Carolina, which in turns, who knows what's going on with it.
And to give a shout out, if you will, to our finance department, I know that we've got some Kannapolis City Schools folks here now, and we've had some Cabarrus County folks here already this evening, and I know that they work very hard to try to identify the items that we can help to make sure that, like constructing new buildings, I believe that one we've kind of taken care of, but there's some other areas that it's obvious that they can save money at. We need to save the funds as far as that goes, so anyway.
Is that on the schools' legislative goals legislative goals as well, that you know of, Commissioner Poole?
I would presume that it is, but that is a presumption. I haven't looked at, I think they're still working through theirs. I have not looked at the North Carolina School Board Association to see if that's on there, but in the past, it has been one of their efforts to try to get that legislation in. So I can't imagine that it's not one of theirs. If that makes sense. I would presume that it is one of their goals, and I think we should be supportive of that.
Do you know why it was ever taken out, or why the schools were taken out of the sales tax exemption, if they were ever in?
They were in. Why they were taken out, I don't know if it was an oversight. I believe that they were in, but I believe that's been a number of years ago. County Manager Day is nodding his head that he does have recollection of that also.
There's a lot of local money that pays sales taxes with school purchases, and the state benefits from that.
Okay. I didn't know, do you know when it was taken out?
It's been, I would say, 5 to 7 years ago, something like that. Will might know. You know?
We could apply for a refund, we weren't exempt.
Okay.
Get a refund on the state and the local. We could have been
Local,
exempt.
yeah.
At some point in time before I got here. It was about 5 years ago.
Okay. I agree with you, Commissioner Poole, that it would be good to place that under on one of our legislative goals. Does anybody else disagree or agree, or everybody else is in favor? Okay. Payment in lieu of taxes, that is something that I brought up that I think that we need that is important to discuss, and that there's a tremendous amount of property, not only in Cabarrus County, but throughout the state, that is not, is tax exempt for whatever reason. And whether it's full payment of taxes or partial payment of taxes, I certainly think that that there's a lot of benefit that is received by the nonprofits that the county is responsible for, and the county is actually helping some of those nonprofits. And I think that is something that needs to be looked into as to if we're providing services that organization normally would provide, then, and we're receiving no benefit, then there certainly that's certainly is unfair, and it's not something that I think is the appropriate thing to do. But I do believe that we need to look at when there's a non-exempt or tax-exempt status, is that there needs to be looked at as to whether or not a portion should be paid, if not 100% should be paid, on their real property and their personal property. Commissioner Meisner?
Where will that overlap? Whose jurisdiction will that?
Well, it would be something that the state would look at, because under whatever the tax exempt status is, they could apply it to different 501c companies, corporations, and the state would be able to break it down as to how they see fit. But I think that, as it relates right here, is that there are some services that we provide that directly benefit nonprofit organizations, and we receive no funds from those organizations in saving them money. And I think that it's something that the legislature should certainly look at to make certain that everybody is being treated fairly and in that manner. Any other discussion?
I think it's fine to add that to our list.
Okay.
If they're getting benefits, they should be paying something.
Well, and that's the whole thing, is that many of the organizations may be receiving benefits and don't recognize it, or they may recognize it, but they put no value to the fact that they're not having to deal with that issue. And I know that just in the Department of Social Services, there's a lot of things that the Department of Social Services does that relieves the burden on a lot of nonprofits. And, you know, that is not recognized. And I think that we need to, that needs to be fully discussed. And whether they pass it or not, that's fine, but it needs to be discussed, because I believe that the county is providing services, not the county, but there are some agencies within the county that's providing services that are directly beneficial to nonprofits. So we can put that on there. Addressing unfunded mandates, I've brought that up, and it certainly is a concern that I've been raising for quite some time. Is there are going to be subtle ways which I believe the state government is going to push down services or push down requirements for that onto the county and require us to do additional services or provide additional provide additional services or means and not provide the revenue source. I don't know this for a fact, but I would not be surprised if with the overcrowding in the state jails, that they don't push some of that down onto counties, where instead of, right now it's a 90-day stay is paid by the county, they may push it to 120 or 180 days, and that's going to add to our jail population, which is going to require the counties to come up with additional funding for jailers, for jail space, and things of that nature. And I think that's just going to put us in a bind. In regards to schools, what I would not be surprised is if that you hear that they are going to reduce funding to schools, but they're going to increase the classroom capacity. Well, we've built classes or classroom capacity in the schools that we've built based on what we were told to had to be smaller classrooms. So the classrooms are built on 20, 25, maybe 30 students, and if they raise if they reduce the funding by saying you can put more kids in the classroom, well, where are we going to put them? So that, okay, they can, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if they say you can put now 40 kids in a classroom, if the classroom's only built for 20 or 30, you can't put them anywhere. And it's going to require us to have additional classrooms, and they're saying they're saving us money, or not saving us money, but saving the schools money. And that's another issue that I think is going to happen. I know that in the Department of Social Services, the governor, what she did last year was she raised she didn't raise the poverty level, but she raised the ability for someone to receive benefits at 4 times the poverty level, which what that did was it increased the caseload of the Department of Social Services about 1,000 cases, if not more. Well, right, I mean, and so what that has done is increasing the caseload. Now there's more people need to be hired to manage that caseload, and that's another service that we're having to pick up, and the state of North Carolina is not recognizing that expense. And what we get, or what we have gotten in the past from the legislature, this may be different in the new legislature, but what we've gotten in the past is we have no right to complain because we are a wealthy county, that our tax rate is lower, and therefore we can just raise taxes to cover these issues or cover these costs, and be more commiserate with other counties in the state of North Carolina. And I just think that is ridiculous. And I think we have two options. One, I think we put it on our legislative goals is, do not push down services to the counties without providing a funding source for it from the state, number one. Number two is what we can do locally is if there is an unfunded mandate that requires additional expense from the county, then I think we should identify it. And we, as a board, need to make a decision whether we're going to fund it or not, and make it readily known that this is not something we're going to fund. If it is something we have no choice to fund, such as school capacity, such as jails, then I think it needs to be recognized so that the citizens realize if there is a tax increase or if there is another service we have to cut to fund it, it's not from our doing, it's from the legislators doing, or from Raleigh, or from the federal government. But we are fools to believe that $3.7 billion is not going to somehow get pushed down to the counties. I've been long-winded on that. Does anybody?
I agree with you. I mean, unfunded mandates is, I was going to say they're a pain, but that's a mild way of putting it. It's not right for us to be put in that position. We are a Tier 3 county, which is considered a wealthy county in the state of North Carolina. We still have our poverty issues here in the county, as we all know, and there are a lot of services that are already stretched to the limits, and the legislature needs to figure out what they want to do. But to say that we don't, our tax rate is too low, and that it's kind of our own problem, I think is also ridiculous. So unfunded mandates are not something that I would hope that we have to deal with any more than we've had over all the years we've had them pushed down our throat already.
Well, and I'm going to go even further than that, and if you look at the way the whole system's set up with counties and tiering in the wealthy and non-wealthy counties in North Carolina, it just goes directly against the idea that this nation was founded on free markets and reward and consequence and treats our 100 counties as a communal state. That is that somehow or other that we take from the rich counties and give it to the poor counties, and thinking that rising tide raises all boats. But what ends up happening is that it shows you where the balance of power has been over the last 40 years in the legislature, and it's been east of 95, and that's where the poor counties are at. We've been pouring money into poor counties for the last 40 years in the state, and they're still the poorest counties in the state. And I'm not saying that there should not be some wealth sharing between wealthy and unwealthy counties, but when you sit there and you just basically the option you have is to raise taxes, or when they put the lottery construction money together, the way that funding formula was set, that the lower your tax rate was, the less money you got, then it just tells me that that's the goal, is to make the politically unpopular decisions at the local level, take away our flexibility, and that is supposed to solve the problem, and it doesn't.
I agree with everything that's been said. The unfunded mandates have been discussed by counties for a long, long time, and I think with our upcoming 2013 budget, each of us know how really crucial it'll be if we get additional unfunded mandates and how we can absorb those costs.
The first mistake they made when they come up with the first one, they should have refused to do it and stopped it then. But it's got to come to the point where we got to say no sometime. I mean, it's just going to have to stop. We can't keep funding all this stuff. And I thought that's what we changed the legislator in Raleigh for, was to stop some of this stuff going on. I hope they're going to stop it. I don't know what they're going to do, but especially Washington, they broke now, so they can't fund nothing. We can't fund it for them.
Well, if it would not, what I would ask from staff is that as y'all come across policies from the state or the federal government that we are having to increase our budget or pay additional services for, if we could get those identified so that we will know how that's affecting our budget, I certainly appreciate it, and I think this board would like to, if you can identify, or as y'all identify. Mr. Day?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. And I remember when I was in graduate school, I had a professor that used to be fond of saying that where you stand depends on where you sit. And so those folks sitting in Raleigh have a different view of this, and they said that you can raise your property tax rate to $1.50. So we've provided you the means to raise the money for any of these things that we tell you that you have to do. It's not unfunded. You have the ability to fund it. But as you all know and as you discussed, maybe the folks at home look at that a little bit differently. And so maybe some of the things that could be done would be a request in the manner in which some things happen in Raleigh. So if a bill is proposed, there's always an economic or financial impact study that has to be done. But I've never seen one that said that they had to determine just what the cost to each individual county would be and what the impact on that tax rate would be, and have that published in every newspaper, for example, or something like that. So there might be some other requests that would be related to this that could be made, but might help make the point in a way that is consistent with the perceptions of the folks in Raleigh, to help them work through that. One of the things also that the Commissioners Association has done over the years is to ask for a menu of revenue items. So over the last several decades, the General Assembly has approved some options for revenue for some counties and not for others. And these are all used to meet obligations that often we face as a result of actions of the General Assembly. So the request has been made to give us a little more choice in how we raise the money for the things you make us do. And that is also something that's related, and also an annual item for the Commissioners Association. But those are some things that you might also want to consider in relation to this issue.
Commissioner Cruz?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I draw attention to page 134 through 136, and that is the taxation and finance legislative proposals, including the taxation and finance policy statement. And included in there is implied in there, and I'm reading directly, and says in there that that's what the association will be doing. The advocacy team would be looking for those that places where, would basically, that the state would finance anything that they passed and would not pass that along to counties. And probably said it in more genteel terms than what we've said it today, but, and that county should have the options on those different revenue streams and sources. You might want to read through that too. So.
How hard would it be for, I don't think it would be that difficult for the legislature to, if we're going to increase classroom size, this is what it means cost-wise to each county. I don't think that information would be that difficult to come up with.
In fact, the NCACC staff normally ends up doing that because it's not done by the General Assembly staff. And so in trying to support the position of counties, that often happens. So it may not make it all that public because there's no requirement for it to be made public. But no, I don't think that there would be much problem at all in obtaining that information.
And actually, the number one legislative goal that was voted on by the association is the mother of all unfunded mandates, and that was this idea has been floated around Raleigh recently that we pass along the cost of maintaining and constructing secondary roads in the state to counties. So when the engineer presented that to us, that would then become our responsibility to fund that every year, put us in the road business.
Well, I certainly think we need to put that in there, and also request that if there's any additional cost to the counties, that that analysis be made so that we would have that opportunity so the taxpayers here would know what that means to them as we are forced to provide additional services or additional services that's not being requested by the county. Last one we have here is in local government incentives. I believe that there's been several readings of a Senate bill, and the final one's tonight. And I think the vote is tonight in regards to Golden Leaf or.
Right, that's a bill where the senators proposed to essentially sweep clean a number of line items that have some discretionary money available as a way to reduce the expenses for not just this fiscal year, but those are also to be used for recurring expenses in the budget, so that it would also affect next year's budget as well in reducing the amount of the deficit.
And in regards to the Golden Leaf, that is from tobacco, is that correct?
That's the money from Tobacco Trust Fund settlement.
Okay. And it was supposed to be apportioned to those counties that have been directly impacted by the loss of tobacco products, or how much has the county received in regards to Philip Morris leaving?
I don't believe that the county's ever received any money from any of the tobacco trusts or Golden Leaf or anything related to that.
So they got this big pot of money as it relates to at least Philip Morris, and Cabarrus County's not received a dime that you're aware of.
That's correct.
And they're going to now use that money to balance or chip away at the however many billion dollars.
Mr. Chairman, also, yeah.
Isn't that ironic?
I will upon you on the absurdity, and that was a couple years ago. I know that, I believe it was also designed, that the Golden Leaf Fund was designed to help communities wean themselves off of tobacco as part of their economy. And I understand that a couple years ago, there was a state-of-the-art tobacco drying warehouse built Rocky Mount with that Golden Leaf money, so.
We have applied for some Golden Leaf funds, but I think maybe because we're Tier 3 status, we
Yeah,
haven't
there you go.
been the recipient. Or maybe that's not the reason, but
Probably a lot of reasons.
sure they're not. But we have applied for Golden Leaf funds, we just have not been the recipient of those.
That's correct.
Wasn't that one that was going to be used for the kill floor?
That's correct.
Yeah, and we didn't get it.
There's a lot of, I mean, there's been where we've applied trying to get opening up economic development properties or land so that it could be developed for businesses to increase our tax base in that area, and it's been denied every time that I'm aware of. I don't know. I just think it's interesting that with the loss of Philip Morris, that we have received, that our requests continue to be denied.
I know, I got a communication from Golden Leaf saying, please contact your legislators and have them not take the money away, leave them in the position that they've been in. I didn't respond to it primarily because I didn't think we'd gotten any funding from it. And, I mean, they have their own board of directors that make the decision on who gets funding, so I'm not certain that, if we haven't gotten anything in the past, I'm not certain that we really necessarily would, I mean, if it's being voted on tonight anyway, but I don't know that we would take a stand one way or the other if we haven't benefited from it. I know this is not, you're not asking us to take a stand on it, you're just making a statement that that's one area that they're looking at balancing the budget by, but
I should add that we do have an application before the Tobacco Trust Fund right now.
we do.
We do.
Golden Leaf,
No,
no,
that's a separate organization.
okay.
The money gets divvied up and sent to those two different organizations to give it out.
Mr. Cox, I don't know if you were prepared to comment about at least Golden Leaf, but I'm not aware of Cabarrus County or any of the cities receiving any monies from Golden Leaf for any economic development project that we've tried to advance.
I think that about $200,000 has been granted from Golden Leaf for research on the North Carolina Research Campus as it relates to strawberry production. I can't give you the document, but I think that's correct. I sent to the manager today a letter that I sent to our legislative delegation early this morning, having spoken with Senator Hartzell about this several times over the course of the weekend, and knowing that the North Carolina Economic Developers Association, the Charlotte Regional Partnership, Ryan chairing the EDAC group, economic developers, chamber folks from all over the state are very concerned that if you take away the incentives that the state has allowed that are paid for through the One North Carolina Fund that we often don't qualify for because we are a wealthy county, the tobacco trust dollars that John referenced, and the larger Golden Leaf Fund that we haven't seen a whole lot out of. If you take those away out of the recruitment toolbox, then the opportunity North Carolina as an entire state has to be competitive in bringing new jobs to North Carolina is greatly diminished. We've already seen other states like Illinois that have just raised their personal property rate 67% and going to double their corporate tax rate, or raise their corporate tax rate. States all over the country are now looking at Illinois as a harvest field, and they're going in there by the plane and carloads trying to recruit those jobs out. So, and I've referenced those things in the letter that I sent to the legislative delegation today, asking them, my guess is a third reading tonight, it's going to be passed by the Senate. My guess is that Senator Hartzell will vote for it. And so then it goes to the House, and 2 members of our local delegation serve as 4 of the chairs for the Appropriation Committee. That would be Jeff Barnhart and Lynn Johnson. So if the House adopts a similar resolution, then it's just a matter of voting, and it appears they have enough votes in both places to sustain, or override rather, a veto by the governor. So even though, and we have asked many times, as I think you have, for specifically Golden Leaf funding, and we have not especially been very successful. That set aside, we still believe that we need those funds in North Carolina to recruit jobs to the entire state. And hopefully we would find a project that would be worthy of those funds. Again, as you said, because we're so wealthy, we're in a major metro, we've got I-85, people look at us very differently. But we have just as real needs for employment, full employment, as any other county in the state.
Okay. Thank you. In regards to this item, what's the consensus of the board?
Mr. Chairman, if I could explain it a little bit more, because we didn't really touch, I think, on this, that this particular item has to do with potential legislation that may prohibit local governments from granting tax incentives and perhaps other things, and limit the incentives to being provided by the state. Part of the idea behind that is to remove or prevent local communities from competing against one another and essentially driving up the cost of recruitment of businesses, and place that at the state level where the same level of incentives presumably would be offered regardless of where that company goes in North Carolina. So the idea here was to help local governments and focus at the state level for incentives.
Well, my concern about that would be let's see, locally, we've come in at or under budget for decades. And Raleigh is $3.7 billion over budget. You know, as much as we would like to level the playing field, how would we trust Raleigh to make a proper decision on incentives? How are they going to level the playing field? And I'm not asking, that's a rhetorical question, but that would be a concern of mine. Is in theory it's great, but in practicality, does the major metropolitan or major areas benefit, would they benefit greater? And, because they're talking about a $3.1 billion at Southport, right out of Southport, a port. $3.1 billion, and I think that, does everything get sucked over to there for that project to the exclusion of the western part of North Carolina? So I'd be interested to see what their concept is. But, in theory, it's nice, but I don't, when we start seeding things to Raleigh, does that cause more of a problem? Are they able to deal with it better, or do we trust them with leveling out the playing field?
I do think the intent here was, from what I understand of it anyway, it wouldn't necessarily prohibit the local governments from making public improvements.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always a number of utility improvements or street improvements that can be made to encourage a project or land a project. And I think this was more aimed at tax incentives.
Okay. Any other comments? As it relates to the 5 items that we have here, do we want to list those as our 5 top? Do we want to add to it? Do we want to take away from some of these? What is the pleasure of this board?
There was also the USDA Rural Center thing at the top that Mount Pleasant requested.
I don't know, maybe the Lone Ranger here, but this end local government incentives, I think it may be good to review local government incentives and what.
I'm sorry?
Instead of end local government incentives, to review local government incentives to see which ones work, which ones don't.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have, I don't remember us talking much about this, the North Carolina Rural Centers criteria to match the USDA rural development.
Right, and this is often related to what you've also been discussing, that is the tier level. So there's, if you're in a tier level 3 county, regardless of anything else, then you're not eligible for any assistance from the North Carolina Rural Center. And as I mentioned earlier, this came up from the Mount Pleasant town manager, town administrator, who had asked about this. So they might qualify by every other criteria, but because they happen to be in the eastern edge of Cabarrus County, then they're kicked out of it. So their request was for us to add to our legislative agenda to encourage the General Assembly to make a change in that criteria for qualification to receive rural center assistance. And the easiest way to do that is just to have the same kind of requirements as the USDA has to receive rural development funding, which then would open up areas like Mount Pleasant to compete for grants from the rural center.
Is that the only area in that regard? Because, there's several counties like us that have, and what I see happening too is that when you have that rural, they can't compete on a level playing field with counties that are declared rural, that you have, then it makes them non-competitive, which leads to more and more transfer of property and transition of property in suburban developing counties from rural usage to suburban usage, because there's just no way that the agricultural community can compete against those counties that are fully agricultural. Several years ago in the NACO conference meeting on, that same thing, issue came up, is that not just because, you can't imagine, but there's some counties you'd say every county in this country is practically agricultural in some way. It has may not be much, but there's still maybe some farmers or somebody can compete there. And they're disqualified because of that reason.
I think that we should make that one of the bullets. So we would have 6 bullets for hours, and then did we not also discuss adopting the next few pages we have, or the top 5 priorities from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, and then there are some individual policies based on different areas, whether it's the environment Health and Human Services, Public Education, and so forth, that we were also going to support those.
There was
Is that not
discussion
true?
about that, and what we could do is do the, have 5, 6, and then the 7th be the top priority goals of the NCACC, along with their sub-goals.
That's what I'd like to see us do.
And the reason they do these policy statements is knowing that something may come up during the session that's not been addressed. And this gives the advocacy team the broad platitude to work with that issue, knowing kind of the general direction and intent the membership wants to move in.
Okay, well, then, from what I hear, what we're talking about is the 5 that we have bullet point. The question is, under the 5th bullet point in local government incentives, Commissioner Cabarrus was saying, review local government incentives, determine which, if any, work would be the modification that Commissioner Cabarrus, I think, has stated. Is that acceptable to the remaining? Commissioner Burge, Commissioner Meismer? Okay. And we would add the request, or the Mount Pleasant's request, is that we would request to change the NC Rural Center's criteria to match the USDA rural development. That would be 6. And then 7 would be supporting the NCACC's top 5 priority goals, as well as their sub
Policy statements.
policy
Yeah,
statements.
Special word for you.
Does that sound acceptable to everybody? Do we have a motion to place this under, well, do we want it under new business to discuss, or put it under consent?
I believe we put it in the new business. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I'd say new business so that we can,
The public can hear it.
Okay, so we have a motion to place this under new business, when we have a second. Motion would be, motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next matter we have is any updates from commissioners from the liaisons that we are serving on? Any boards or committees? Do we have any discussion today? Commissioner Poole?
I just want to point out, I went to my first Rowan Cabarrus Community College Board of Trustees meeting last week, which was enjoyable. And just a comment, I think it was in there was an article in the paper concerning that meeting. And one of the things, because I think you made the statement at the retreat, that it was a good thing to, when we go to these committees, to say, what would you like for me to share with the county commissioners? And one of the things that they did want to point out is that in the state's efforts to balance the budget and cut expenditures for the rest of this fiscal year, Rowan Community College has a $626,000 reversion that they have been told about. So the state giveth and the state taketh away after it gives. That's what it's done to education, as long as I can remember. But they, at least during these harder times and the recession, they tend to give money, and then, so they can say, well, we fully funded whatever it is, whether it's community college or K-12 education, and then they turn around and say, now you decide where you want to cut and send us money back. So they have been hit. I don't know if the K-12 systems have been hit with a reversion as of late, but I know that the community college has. And their primary concern that they expressed at the meeting was the county budgets and how, what we would be doing as far as our budget goes into next year, which I think, county manager, did you have a meeting with some folks from Rowan Cabarrus recently? So I feel like he has, which, not necessarily that you need to share today, but just that they are working on their budget just like the other systems, the 2 school systems are. And those were the 2 things that they wanted me to mention to this group, that the reversion and that they are concerned about what the county would be able to fund.
One thing about the reversions that a lot of people may not know is that when the money is allocated from the state, the schools K through 12 and then the community colleges have based their budget on that funding for 12 months. The reversions typically come in February, March, or April, which is at the end of their 12 months, and that money has been allocated, and many times that money's spent. So it's not as though you can't hire a teacher and say, okay, well, in 9 months, you got a job for 9 months, and you're going to leave us in April of the next year. So that's where it puts a tremendous burden in regards to the schools on these reversions. So if they're going to make up their mind about the reversion, don't fund it fully in the first place. But that puts a tremendous burden on the schools. I know, because when that came up 2 years ago, I believe it was, that was a big burden on them.
And I also wanted, this was just kind of an interesting topic, I guess, at the EDC meeting, which I didn't realize, but legend cards apparently are all the rage internationally. So that was good news at the EDC meeting when they were talking about the Legends cards. That I guess the reason of being local, that, you know, legend cards just seem kind of normal around here. I don't know where else they are, but there was that comment. So that's one good thing we have internationally going in Cabarrus County, is apparently legend cards have gotten much more popular overseas, and they're trying to develop that market. And I think the EDC folks and maybe the Department of Commerce had helped put them in touch with some people. So that was good news that that particular market was expanding. So thank you.
Got a few
Commissioner
updates. The Department of Social Services, I've been assigned as a board member to their department. One thing that they're seeing is the influx of clientele due to the economy, and that's putting pressure on their department. One thing that they're working on is they're working with the IT department to get a numbering system. Currently, how it's set up is there's a line that goes into the front door. It's a system of line where you will in turn be helped at the counter to avoid these long lines, and sometimes the lines are strung outside the front door. They're working with the IT department to get a numbering system, like I said. Hopefully that'll be there this week. It'll be somewhat like the DMV. As the school systems, I've been assigned liaison to the school systems. Had a meeting with the Cabarrus County School Board Chair, and she and I had discussed the tough budgeting problems that's going to help. So we've had a good open line of communication between ourselves. Also been assigned board member to the PCJC, and the January meeting we had an allocation of grant money. A portion went to the Health Alliance and to the 4-H program. Also this Friday we have a legislative breakfast that will host our state legislators to give them an update on what's going on. I've been assigned liaison to the Department of Aging, and there we had the retreat this past week, and so I went to the retreat, met all the board members, learned a little about what they do. Also been assigned liaison to the library system. I attended an event at the Mount Pleasant Library, which was in honor of Martha Dobson. She's been selected as Diderot teacher this year. All of her expenses are paid by the Target Corporation, and she will be attending a teacher conference in Alaska, as well as volunteering to help with the Iditarod race this summer. She gave a good presentation. And also just wanted to thank the Cabarrus County EMS. This past weekend I took a CPR class. It was $3, CPR certified. It was 2 to 3 hour class, and Bill Jameson was the teacher of that course, and he did an excellent job, and really appreciate them taking time to do that.
Good.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, should it snow this Thursday, that legislative breakfast has, we have an alternate date of February 25th, just in case.
Okay, and it's, what if it snows like a quarter inch.
All the email says is
If it snows. If it snows in Cabarrus County, right? Okay, so if it ices an
No, yeah,
inch, it's going to still be going on.
Tornado hits are still
That's
out.
right. Commissioner Crew.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Received my initial orientation from Soil and Water Conservation District and got a chance actually the day of our retreat, to tour the Porter Farm. And although they don't like to be inundated with requests, they're willing at any time to, any member of the public wants to see their farm, that they would be glad to show them their operation out there. Very beautiful farming that they have worked very hard to put things together out there. Mr. Downs and myself will be attending the 2-day Soil and Water Conservation Supervisor Orientation course next week at the School of Government, next Tuesday and Wednesday. So, and learn a little bit more about that. I've learned that actually, if you have a bare spot in your yard that is half as big as this table, it can actually cause the stream to turn brown on you. So we think it's all from new housing construction, but it's small bare spots. And it's not, I guess a misconception I had was that Soil and Water Conservation District's primary concern was farmers and agriculture, but it's not. There's anybody with your property can help you control the erosion runoff off your own property. The other thing is with Piedmont Behavioral Health Care, there was an announcement made. It was actually in the paper in Burlington here earlier this past week, is that where Alamance Caswell LME, which is the counterpart to Piedmont in that area of the state, is announced that they're merging with Piedmont. And there were some discussions, and it's now out, that's going to be, there's how that will work out its way out. It's all also according to how much legislative support. As you recall, last year, there were some things trying to be done with PBH in regard to the waiver, and it was shot down at the last minute by the legislature. But apparently there's support of the local legislative delegation in that area to proceed with this. The governance structure will be worked out, along with several other details have to be worked out regarding PBH, but it's there is a because if you get too large of this current board structure where you have 4 members per county, then pretty soon you end up with a governing board as big as the legislature, and I don't think anybody wants to create that monster. So it'll be there's several things being floated around, but I'll keep y'all updated on that. But okay. So,
Commissioner Burge, do you have anything to add at this point in time? I was going to defer until later this month.
Not really. I had a lunch meeting scheduled with Mr. Fowler in Locust. Had to cancel it because of knee surgery, and had to miss another meeting last week that I couldn't make. So I'm in the process of getting involved in all of them.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna defer until later this month, because I do know we have one additional matter to discuss that's going to take up some time to discuss, or have some questions, I believe. Is G10, is the revaluation update.
yeah.
That's on page 217. I would call on Mr. Ferris in lieu of Mr. Wiesner.
Mr. Wiesner's out of town.
Yes.
Today,
I think Mr. Ferris has already met up with one property owner at least that has come in. Couldn't let that pass. I
thought it was South Carolina and
All right, we're getting started.
Nah. Tell us what's going on in regards to the update on the reevaluation and sort of a timeline that we need to be discussing.
Well, we're currently finishing up our pictometry review, getting ready to start our revaluation for 2012. I'm trying to work on a cap rate for industrial, commercial type properties. I think there was concern about a 9% decrease. I didn't know if you wanted me to.
Yeah, if you can talk to about the 9% is just a projection as an average, but there's nothing.
Well, what we have to do is run a sales state code report for a sales ratio report for the state every quarter. And that's based on our current sales at the time. And if you look into this, it's basically only sales we really have are single-family type properties. There's very limited commercial, very limited industrial, and, of course, very limited land type properties. So right now, the 9% has nothing to do with upcoming revaluation. It's more of a pure market for what's going on at this time, if that makes sense. It's based on the single-family type properties that are selling. We do have some neighborhoods that, have shown a 30-40% drop, but we also have some subdivisions that's probably gone up in value. So it's kind of hard for us to give you an actual figure at this time until we get more involved into it, if that's okay.
How far along, this is really going to take effect or start, I'm talking about the actual revaluation, the boots on the ground, January 1, 2012?
Yes, sir.
And it will take effect January 1, 2013?
It'll take effect, yes. That's
Okay.
correct. Those values will move forward that day.
Now, what you are doing right now is laying the groundwork for getting ready to start January 1, 2012.
Yes, sir. We have to present the schedule of values for, to approve.
And that's anticipated to be done in the fall of this year?
It looks that way, yes, sir.
Okay.
August or September, is that what we're showing?
Regarding the schedule of values?
Right, the presentation is in August.
Presentation, right.
Okay.
The revaluation should have started this January.
Right, we have.
Well, I'm not saying you haven't started.
Right.
I'm saying is when actually things are really underway is January of next year.
January of next year is 2012,
12.
which will be when those bills, those
Those
valuation
go in
cards will
effect,
go out
yes.
to the public,
Right.
Okay.
telling them what their new value is.
Okay.
Right, I'm sorry.
We got off a year somehow.
Okay.
Sorry.
But it doesn't take effect until January of 2013? Or does it?
It'll come out in the bills in July of
July.
2012, fiscal year
Which is fiscal
13.
Fiscal 13.
Because they have those first 6 months to appeal
Okay.
those values.
You said a pictometry. What is a pictometry?
We're currently just reviewing all the properties in Cabarrus County from an aerial type, looking for additions or property we may have missed. Just trying to collect data and make our property record cards a little more accurate. So
Okay.
when we first got it, I think we found a distribution warehouse that was been there for 10 years and went back and recaptured the taxes plus interest and got quite a bit of money back.
So let's put that in layman's terms. I put an addition to my house.
Yes, sir.
I get a letter from the county that says, have you done an addition? And I say, no.
Yes.
And then you do the pictometry and say, wow, you've got an addition. That's where you get the interest, and that's where,
We can go back 5 years plus current plus
Okay.
interest, yes.
so if I'm not answering that questionnaire truthfully, then the pictometry may and more than likely will catch it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
I guess. yeah,
Commissioner
right.
Carruth.
No, I just was going to, for the general public's understanding, is that when I get my reval card get in the mail saying this is what my property is now worth, and the kind of, I guess, what was the process that went into me getting that value card, that card? I mean, you start, because most people think, well, somebody's going to show up at my door and come out with a tape measure or measuring wheel and start measuring dimensions of my house. So you pretty much just base it first on sales data? Or I guess take what are the steps?
Our first step is, of course, cost. All CAMA packages or software we use for revaluation purposes are based on your cost approach. Our sales come into play to analyze what kind of depreciation schedule we should use, and in some instances, what kind of market value some properties are worth. But there are three different types of approaches. So we look at, of course, the cost approach, the income approach, and the market approach to rely on our analysis for each area. And we break down each neighborhood. I'll give you an example. We'll break down like a township into several different neighborhoods based on the subdivision and the rural areas. And we look at the market for those subdivisions and those rural areas to determine what the value should be on the other properties that haven't sold. So if, and then we'll send the notices out to you to let you review your property.
So when I get that card, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the final value of that. It's just
No,
what you've done based upon what's kind of the area. So it's very important. I think it's where a lot of people don't realize that blue card you get with that. You have, if you want to question that value and have a more detailed appraisal done, then you send that card back in, and that is part of that.
Yeah, I would say the first step you should do probably is get your property record card and look over it, make sure it's accurate. Look at the square footage, look at your property details, construction details. Then if you have a question about this, we'll be glad to go over your property record card and discuss any kind of questions you have or concerns. And then at that time, if you're still uncomfortable or don't feel like that is the true market value, you can send it in for an informal review, and we'll be glad to look it over, see if there's anything we missed. We have basically 6 appraisers going over 80-some thousand parcels, so I'm not saying we won't miss anything. And we'll be glad to review it, and that would be your starting point. So,
Okay.
is that it?
Commissioner Meismer?
I got a question. So going back to whenever you touched on how the values come about, if you take the township, you break it down into divisions, if there's subdivision, rural, and within that breakdown, there's a property that's sold for a certain value, that's taken into account for the surrounding properties?
Yes.
The value? Okay.
Yes, sir. It's kind of a reverse of a fee appraisal, and I could get into that with you if you'd like to come by and go over it, but we take all the sales that the state deems us to qualify as good sales, and we use those sales to bring the other properties to that market, whether it be up, down, or stay the same.
How does the state deem a property good sale, or?
Well, like foreclosures, we're not allowed to use as an arm's length transaction, and I think most fee appraisers would agree with that. However, if you have a subdivision that's your primary sales, we'll look at it, yes, but we're not allowed to necessarily use those sales, if that makes sense.
So if someone, say in the rural area, someone has 200 acres, they sell that to a developer, and they were paid a good amount of money for that property, that still could be part of taking in effect?
Yes, sir.
For that? Okay.
Yes.
So that could increase the values of the surrounding properties?
Sure. And we have coefficient of dispersions to figure out within a 10%, 15% type atmosphere, because you have some that would sell for prime dollar amount, and then you have others that probably wouldn't sell for as much. And we have to review those sales and make sure they're what, it is an arm's length transaction. So, like if I sold a piece to my brother,
Yeah.
that wouldn't be deemed reasonable, even though I'd probably charge him extra, but.
That's fine. I just want to make sure I understood the process.
Yes, sir. That's the process.
Any other questions? Well, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir, Mr. Butler.
If staff could just keep us up to date, maybe quarterly as to how things are progressing, that's important, because it is important for the community to know what's going on, and when we get more clear a picture, we can put that into our projections to see how that's going to affect us, and we can plan for it.
Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, Brent said he'd be glad to give you a monthly or every other month type
What I would
updates if
ask
you'd like.
is if we could look at it maybe on a quarterly basis.
That'd be
And if
great.
something comes up that is an aberration or something that we, that maybe can't wait for a quarter,
Yes, sir.
let's go ahead and get that on the table so that we are aware of what's going on.
Sounds like a good plan.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
I have all of the new business completed. If we now can go back to the consent agenda, and in regards to the APAC recommendations is, what we had talked about at our retreat is to get a report back from staff so that if that's still the consensus of this board, we can take that off the consent agenda as it relates to a report or as it relates to information until staff has had a chance to review it and analyze it. So can we have a motion to remove that from the consent agenda until staff has had a chance to come back to us with a recommendation? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Then number 2 is, this is a memorandum of understanding, which we've had quite a bit of discussion as it relates to, between a county memorandum of understanding and the schools, or actually the Cabarrus County School System is asking us to enter into this memorandum of understanding. The last time we had a discussion, that was to be tabled until it could be brought up at the chair-vice chair meeting. That has not been set, so that, is there a motion to remove that from the consent agenda until the chair-vice chair meeting is heard, number 1, and then number 2, that is presented to this board at the following work session? Does that sound good to everybody? Do we have a motion to remove it from the consent agenda?
So moved.
We have a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. And then that would leave items F3, 4, 5, and 6. Is there any discussion or any information that this board needs to take up as it relates to those items right now? Is everybody comfortable with placing those on the consent agenda for February the 21st? We have a motion to place items F3, 4, 5, and 6 on the consent agenda for February the 21st. We got a motion from Commissioner Carruth. We got a second? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. And with that, I believe that concludes all of our business today. Have I missed anything, Mrs. Honeycutt? We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you all.